I think the first thing to say is, picking up off the back of your discussion and talking about feminism, I think that one of the things that David Nichols, who I think has done a very good job with the screenplay, does is he does play up the feminism which is inherent in the story anyway, because essentially the story is of somebody who is in an oddly independent position, that she's inherited this farm, and yet she's also torn between three suitors. Gabriel Oak, the sturdy one, Boldwood, who's got wealth, and brilliantly played by Michael Sheen, who looks awkward and ill at ease and really, really sort of uncomfortable. And then Sergeant Troy, the caddish, rakish, wouldn't trust him as far as you could.
Absolutely don't go anywhere near him ever.
And yet, actually, what the story manages to be about is about her independence. I mean, there are a couple of moments when this is explicitly sort of said, in which she talks about the fact that she's too independent for marriage, when she's having that discussion in which she's asked to explain her feelings. This is with Michael Sheen. She says it's very hard to explain what you feel in a language which is designed by men to express their feelings. So there are many moments in it in which these elements, which are all in the text, are sort of brought to the fore. And I think when you were talking about how modern it feels, it's absolutely right, because you can see that story now. And all that it has to say about gender roles, all that it has to say about her role as an independent woman, somebody finding her own way, somebody who doesn't just want to sort of conform to, is all in there. And that's actually what makes it modern now. And that's also, oddly enough, what made it modern in the 1967 Schlesinger version, which we shall talk about a little bit more, because it's impossible not to compare the two. It was interesting that she said she hadn't seen it. And of course, as far as Julie Christie's concerned, that performance now is considered iconic. At the time, it was very roughly received. People thought that Julie Christie was, and this is the irony of it, was too modern. They thought that Julie Christie was too much sort of, a hip happening person of the moment. How can Schlesinger cast her in something which is a period drama? So I think one of the strengths of this new version, one of the things that I like about it very much, and it does come down to, firstly, the fact that Carey Mulligan, can portray all those sort of conflicting things. But secondly, the screenplay has done a very good job of taking that tack of saying this is really the centre of the story. The centre of the story is to do with her quest for independence, around which the romance is circled, but they never usurp that central position. None of the men dominate the movie. As I was saying before, it is absolutely Bathsheba Everdene's story, rather than the story of her suitors, all of whom sort of suffer. It's at the very, very beginning. Gabriel Oak proposes, and there's that scene in which he brings around a lamb and says, "I brought a lamb. Would you like to marry me?" And she says, "No, I'd like to be independent." Then later,
I'll give you a piano.
I'll give you a piano. And then later on, William Boldwood says, "You want to get married? I'll give you a piano." She says, "I've already got a piano." But then, of course, it's Sergeant Troy who turns up with his sword-waving skills. And funnily enough, because it is impossible to extricate this from the Schlesinger version, the sword-waving scene in which Frank does this kind of great display of his swordsman-like skills, which is very, very close to being it's a sort of erotic scene. And it's funny because in the new version, it's done in a way which is more sort of, gropey, lusty. But actually what it doesn't have is the breathless weirdness of that sequence in the Schlesinger version is extraordinary. And, Nick Rogue is largely the member, but it is absolutely bizarre. That sequence in the Schlesinger version is the thing that everybody remembers. You forget how mad it is. And that madness is certainly reined in. And one of the things that I think is an interesting comparison between these two versions. I mean, the Schlesinger version is longer and has stuff anyway. It has, for example, the whole carnival sequence, which is very central to it. If the Schlesinger version has the edge, it's in terms of its muddiness. The Schlesinger version feels in that kind of Andrew Cotting way, that it's stuck its
What does that
hands.
mean? What's
Andrew Cotting is a filmmaker who made things like This Filthy Earth. So and
I missed that.
No, actually, did you?
Did I?
I don't know.
Did I miss that?
It's that sense of literally having your hands in the mud. If there is a flaw to this version of Far from the Madding Crowd, there was a couple of moments in which the dirt on the faces looked a little bit designer. It looked a little bit like, do you know what I mean? There was a couple of moments where there's a
Farm Clothes by Armani.
Farm Clothes by Armani with a little smudge on the cheek, just enough to say, "Hey, I'm working with."
Did you at any stage think they could be in Mumford and Sons?
I didn't think that.
I did think that.
Did you? Okay.
It is a little bit Mumford in places.
But the other thing, the other thing that's interesting about it is, I thought it looked beautiful. And Charlotte Ross Christensen, who shot it, was the cinematographer. I went to the IMDb, which said that it was shot on an Arriflex. I thought it's weird because
what does that mean?
That it was shot digitally, and actually it looked not on an Arriflex, an Arri Alexa, pardon me, and it looked to me like it was something. I've read a couple of interviews in which it was indeed, it was originated on film stock, which makes sense because it does have that texture. And what's interesting about the film is that therefore it is modern, but it's also oddly old-fashioned. It's oddly old-fashioned in the way in which it wants to look. It's not just to do with it being a period piece, it's to do with them talking about the texture of film. It's got a kind of fairly straightforward... I mean, when you think that Vinterberg is famous for Festen, Celebration, and Jagdturn, if that's the correct pronunciation, The Hunt, which are these two incredible, I mean, really emotionally grueling stories.
Well, Kerry Mulligan said that's why she wanted to work with him.
Absolutely. But what you're not getting with Far From the Madding Crowd is that, actually. You don't get that real edginess that Vinterberg made his name with. What this is a very solid, very handsomely mounted, very intelligently written, and, you know, well played adaptation. What it isn't is raw or rough around the edges, or you know, sort of incendiary. It feels very solid, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's a film that is perfectly happy when it needs to. Although there's a lot of interior stuff in it, it is happy to relish the countryside, to show you these vistas, not so much so as the Schlesinger, but to show you these kind of vistas of, you know, rolling fields and sheep. There are a couple of shots of sheep, incidentally. Which, what? You're giving me a funny look.
No. I just wonder when you say it's not incendiary. I was just processing what you're telling me about.
Yeah, I mean,
but the book. It's a while since I read it, but maybe it's therefore more faithful to the Thomas Hardy, because the book is not incendiary and lustful. It has all that stuff, but Schlesinger was the person who put it into his movies.
Yes, I know. I agree. I don't think it's necessarily a criticism of it. It is just it's a fairly well. I mean, it's having fun. It's reverential of the text. It's also having fun with the text. I think Mulligan is terrific. I think Michael Sheen is great at doing, I mean, really looking like somebody who is so, you know, pent up and overall. The other thing that's interesting is that there is more sympathy for the character of Sergeant Troy in this than perhaps you might expect. When he gets jilted at the altar early on and you see him shed a tear, there is a suggestion that all the later anger and everything, it has to be tempered by that element of pathos, which, of course, is something that you didn't get from Terence Stamp. You get a lot of things from Terence Stamp, but not pathos. So my general feeling about it was a really good, solid, intelligent, well-made adaptation. A little safe around the edges sometimes, not raw or ragged or quite earthy enough for me, but with a very strong playing up of the film's of the story's feminist thrust, which I liked very much, and in a handsome viewing. And I think it'll stand the test of time.